Imagine waking up in a cold sweat because you suddenly remembered a promise you broke, and then realizing that to fix it, you owe the ancient equivalent of a 20% overdraft fee to God. Welcome to the deep dive. Before we jump in, I want to extend a warm divine blessing over your day and your week ahead. Wherever you are listening from, may you find peace, clarity, and unexpected insights, and may your steps be guided as we explore the surprisingly modern psychology hidden inside the ancient legal code of Leviticus.
Thank you for that. It really is a fascinating psychological landscape because today we are talking about something that, well, every single human being carries, but very few of us know exactly what to do with. I mean, guilt, specifically the guilt of the unintentional mistake.
Right, and when we think about ancient legal codes, there is usually this expectation of rigid, almost robotic precision. Think of like a modern traffic camera. You run a red light, the camera flashes, and a week later, a fine shows up in your mailbox.
Yeah, exactly.
It is entirely binary. You broke the rule, here's the penalty. There's no discussion of your mental state or your intent. It's just cold and transactional.
Which is exactly why stepping into the world of Leviticus chapter 5 is such a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
We are looking at a text that governs ancient Israelite law, but it isn't focused on premeditated, deliberate crimes.
Right, so no bank heists here.
No heists. The thief who plans a robbery or the person who intentionally commits violence, that's handled elsewhere. The material we are analyzing today is strictly about what happens when things go wrong accidentally.
Oh.
We were talking about everyday slip-ups, hidden mistakes, accidental impurities, and the immediate pressing need to restore balance with God and with the community when you didn't even mean to mess up in the first place.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we want to understand how forgiveness actually functioned in this ancient system, we first need to know what, required forgiving in a normal, everyday context.
Not-
When we look at the first 4 verses of Leviticus 5, the text lays out 4 very specific scenarios that trigger this whole process.
Yeah, and there are scenarios of hidden or delayed awareness sins. The first involves the justice system. Imagine a call goes out for witnesses in a public dispute, backed by a public oath or curse.
Okay.
If you saw something or knew something, but you fail to step forward and testify, essentially committing perjury by omission, you carry that iniquity.
Oh, wow. So just staying silent gets you in trouble.
Exactly. Then the second and third scenarios deal with ritual purity. This is accidentally touching the carcass of an unclean wild or domestic animal, or accidentally coming into contact with human impurity.
And then there's the 4th one, which feels incredibly relatable even today, making a rash, reckless oath.
Yes, the classic speaking without thinking.
Right. Swearing to do something good or evil and then just completely forgetting you ever said it. Now, looking at this list, I have to push back on the organization here.
Okay, lay it on me.
Why on earth are these 4 things grouped together in the exact same legal tier? I mean, you have perjury by omission in a high-stakes courtroom setting right next to accidentally stepping on a dead bug in the wilderness.
It does seem completely random at first glance.
Yeah. One destroys a community's justice system, and the other just means you need a ceremonial bath. It reads like a bizarre terms and conditions document where the clauses have absolutely nothing to do with each other.
On the surface, I agree. The severity of the acts varies wildly. But the unifying thread isn't the severity of the crime. It is the cognitive state of the offender.
The cognitive state.
Yeah. When you dig into the original Hebrew nuances of these passages, the defining feature connecting all 4 cases is that the person either committed the act unconsciously at the time or they completely forgot about it.
Oh, interesting.
The guilt doesn't activate in their conscience when the event actually happens. It activates the exact moment the person realizes what they've done.
Ah, so the crime isn't just the act itself, it's the delayed realization. It's that sinking feeling in your stomach when you're lying in bed at night staring at the ceiling, and suddenly it hits you like, oh no, I promised I would help with that project, and I completely blew it off.
Precisely. Or, I should have spoken up when they asked for witnesses today and I just sat there.
Right.
For example, the Hebrew word used for making a rash oath, bada, describes words spoken precipitously. The person spoke without the careful consideration that an oath to God requires.
They just blurted it out.
Exactly. Or, in the witness scenario, an oath normally came with a divine curse against anyone who didn't fulfill it. By keeping silent, maybe out of fear of the crowd or just not wanting to get involved, the person became responsible before God.
Wow.
But the text emphasizes that the sudden awareness, that cold wash of realization, is what triggers the legal and spiritual need for a remedy.
So you've had that cold wash of realization. The guilt is sitting heavy on your chest. You can't just ignore it. What is the immediate next step to get that weight off?
Well, you can't just carry it around forever.
Right. Which brings us to the prescribed method of resolution. And looking at the text, the resolution process reveals an incredibly compassionate economic structure.
It really does. But before any economic transaction or physical sacrifice takes place, the text demands something profoundly personal.
Wait, there's a step before the sacrifice?
Yes. The absolute first mandatory step is public, specific confession. You can't just quietly pay a fine, slip a sheep to the priest, and walk away looking innocent.
Oh, wow.
The root meaning of confess in this context involves declaring the specific sin out loud. It requires genuine public ownership of the mistake.
You have to verbalize the oops.
That's a great way to put it, yes.
You have to bring the secret into the light. And it's only after that confession that the physical restitution, the sacrifice, comes into play.
Exactly.
And this is where the ancient legal code actually shows a surprising amount of grace. The text outlines a three-tiered sliding scale for the sin offering, guaranteeing that absolutely everyone had access to a clean slate, regardless of their bank account.
And that guaranteed access is the crucial takeaway from this entire system. The standard requirement to clear this guilt was bringing a female sheep or a goat.
Which is a lot, right?
Huge. In an ancient agrarian society, livestock is your livelihood. Giving up a healthy sheep is a significant loss of wealth. It's a heavy cost for carelessness.
Yeah, that would sting.
But what if you are poor? If a sheep or goat would bankrupt your family, the law shifts. It allows you to bring 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons instead.
So it scales down.
Right. One serves as the sin offering for purification, and the other as a burnt offering to reestablish your dedication to God.
And the ritual gets surprisingly specific with the birds. The priest is instructed to wring the bird's neck without severing the head completely. It's not a chaotic process.
No, not at all.
It is a very solemn, deliberate procedure meant to impress the gravity of the sin upon the person bringing the offering.
Exactly. But the compassion of the system doesn't stop at the birds, because even 2 small birds might be too expensive for someone who's completely destitute. So if a person is extremely poor, the text instructs them to bring 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour.
And here's where it gets really fascinating. The text places a very strict, almost culinary restriction on that flour offering. It explicitly forbids the person from adding any olive oil or frankincense to the flour.
Yes, it does.
Which is weird, because if you were offering something to the divine, wouldn't human nature dictate that you want to dress it up, make it smell good? Why is there a mandate to make this flour offering as plain and unappealing as possible?
Well, we have to look at the historical and cultural context of Israelite symbolism. In this society, oil and incense are universal symbols of joy, celebration, and gladness.
Okay.
They are the standard required ingredients for voluntary grain offerings, which are brought as expressions of thanksgiving. But this specific flour offering isn't a thanksgiving offering.
It's a sin offering.
Right.
It's a physical manifestation of sorrow.
Exactly. It is a moment of deep repentance. So the elements of joy are intentionally stripped away. Bringing dry, unadorned flour physically and visually communicates the barrenness and gravity of the sin.
That makes so much sense.
But the deeper theological point here is really profound. The law usually demands blood for a sin offering like the sheep or the doves because blood represents life.
Right, that's the standard.
Yet God completely waives that requirement for the poorest among them. God substitutes the absolute necessity of animal blood with a somber, unadorned handful of grain, simply to ensure that systemic poverty never becomes a barrier to forgiveness.
It is essentially an income-based repayment plan for the soul.
I love that framing.
I mean, it completely dismantles the modern stereotype of the Old Testament God as this unapproachable, rigid deity. The system actually bends and flexes to ensure that you aren't forced to carry a heavy conscience just because you had a bad harvest.
Yes.
But what if the unintentional mistake isn't just a personal impurity or a forgotten promise? What if your accidental slip-up actually costs someone else something tangible? Specifically, what if you accidentally defraud the sanctuary itself?
That transitions us into an entirely different legal category. Starting in verse 14, the text addresses what is called sacrilege, or sins of ignorance regarding holy things.
Okay, sacrilege.
Yeah. This happens when someone unintentionally commits an offense against the sacred property. Maybe by withholding a required tithe out of forgetfulness, or misusing something dedicated to the sanctuary.
Got it.
For this, the standard sin offering we just discussed is completely insufficient. It requires what the Hebrew text calls an asham, which translates to a guilt or restitution offering.
And the barrier to entry for an asham is steep. You can't just bring a handful of flour for this, you have to bring a flawless ram, and its value is specifically assessed in silver shekels according to the official sanctuary standard.
Right, it's very formal.
But the ram is just the spiritual side of the equation. The offender also has to return whatever was taken or profaned, and then add a 20% penalty, a 1/5 surcharge, which is handed over to the priest.
It is a rigorous, undeniable economic penalty.
I have to play devil's advocate here because this seems to contradict the grace we just saw with the flour.
Okay, how so?
If we've established that this was truly an accident, an honest, unintentional error, why hit the person with a 20% fine? If I borrow my neighbor's expensive lawnmower and accidentally break it, the right thing to do is buy them a new lawnmower. I don't buy them a new lawnmower and hand them a wad of cash as a punitive fine for an accident. Isn't replacing the profane item enough? Why is the system levying a surcharge on a mistake?
It is a brilliant question, and it strikes at the core difference between a moral failing and a material debt. To understand the 20% fine, we have to contrast two Hebrew concepts, chadath and asham.
Okay, chadath and esham.
Yes. Chadath is the standard sin offering, the sliding scale of sheep, birds, and flour we discussed. Its entire focus is on purification. It removes the moral stain of sin and repairs the broken relationship with God.
It addresses the abstract weight of guilt.
Exactly.
Okay, so the chadath clears the air and reestablishes the connection.
Right. But asham, the guilt or restitution offering, operates on a completely different frequency. The root nuance of asham involves culpability and making the offended party materially whole. This was used when a sin actively defrauded the holy things of God, or even defrauded another human being, like swearing falsely about a lost item you found.
So it's about actual damages.
Yes, the 20% surcharge isn't just punishment. It acts as an assessment of damages plus compensation for the loss of use. It teaches a hard, uncompromising truth about living in a community. Even an accidental debt is a real debt.
So intent doesn't magically erase the physical deficit your action created.
Exactly. If you accidentally withhold what belongs to the sanctuary is still operating at a deficit, regardless of how sorry you are. The 20% penalty forces the offender to feel the tangible weight of their carelessness.
Wow.
It ensures that restitution isn't just a quick, "Oh, I'm sorry, my bad." It proves that actions have consequences in the real world, and true repentance sometimes requires digging into your own pockets to repair the material breach, just as the sacrifice repairs the spiritual breach.
It's the difference between writing an emotional apology letter to your bank and actually paying the overdraft fee so the account balances out. One makes you feel better internally, but the other actually fixes the ledger.
That is a perfect analogy. The ledger has to be balanced in both realms, the physical and the spiritual.
Knowing that, we have to look at how all these specific rules, the hidden sins, the sliding scale of flour, the 20% surcharge, fit into the grand architecture of ancient Israelite worship.
It's a massive system.
It is. The study materials map out this incredible summary of the entire sacrificial system, detailing 5 main pillars. And when you look at how these 5 pillars interact, it completely changes how you view this society.
It is crucial to view them as an interconnected ecosystem rather than just isolated rules. The system categorizes 5 distinct types of sacrifices, creating a brilliant balance.
So let's look at the mechanisms.
First, you have the burnt offering. This is entirely voluntary. The animal is fully consumed by fire on the altar, symbolizing complete surrender, total dedication, and an unbroken commitment to God.
And looking at the pattern here, the second pillar is the grain offering, which is also completely voluntary. This is the one made of fine flour, oil, and salt, but no yeast. It represents Thanksgiving for the first fruits of the harvest.
Right.
It is a pure, unprompted expression of gratitude.
Then you have the third pillar, the peace or fellowship offering, also voluntary. This symbolizes communion with God and with your neighbors. It was often shared as an actual physical meal, expressing deep gratitude or accompanying a special vow.
I'm noticing a clear divide in this architecture. Those first 3, the burnt, grain, and peace offerings, are entirely voluntary.
Yes, they are.
They function almost like the regular, healthy maintenance of a relationship. You don't bring a gift to a close friend only when you've deeply offended them. You bring it just to celebrate the bond. It's an entirely different posture than the final 2 pillars, which are the mandatory sacrifices.
That is exactly how the system was designed to operate. The first 3 are about cultivating the relationship. The final two are the mandatory triage for when that relationship inevitably breaks down.
The triage.
Exactly. The fourth pillar is the sin offering, which is exactly what we saw in the first half of our discussion today. It is strictly mandatory for unintentional sin and for purification, featuring that beautiful graduated scale for the poor. It handles the moral stain.
And the fifth and final pillar is the guilt offering, the asham, also mandatory. This is for the restitution of rights or holy things, requiring the flawless ram and the 20% penalty. It handles the material debt.
And notice how these pillars would interact in real time. The system is intentionally layered. If you accidentally stole from the sanctuary, you couldn't just offer one blanket sacrifice.
You'd need multiple.
Yeah. You first needed the guilt offering to pay back the material debt and the 20% fine. But you might also need to bring a burnt offering afterward to reestablish the total spiritual surrender that you clearly lacked when you became careless. It's a multi-step mechanism for complete holistic rehabilitation.
When you look at all five pillars operating together, it shatters the misconception that this was just some primitive, chaotic slaughterhouse.
Totally.
It was a highly organized, psychologically profound system of relationship management. It managed the vertical relationship, humanity's connection with the divine, through surrender, gratitude, and purification.
Yes.
And it equally managed the horizontal relationship, how people treated each other, their community, and their shared resources, through strict material restitution and fellowship meals.
It provides a comprehensive framework for living in reality. The text implicitly acknowledges that human beings are deeply flawed. They're going to mess up.
We definitely do.
They will be forgetful, they will be careless with their words, they will incur debts they never intended to incur. The ancient law doesn't demand impossible, unbroken perfection from its people. It demands rigorous accountability. It provides clear, actionable, physical pathways back to a clean slate.
It is incredibly practical. When you strip away the cultural distance of an ancient agrarian society, the human psychology operating underneath these rituals is remarkably modern. We still need ways to balance the ledger.
Which leads to a really provocative thought about how we handle that exact same human psychology today.
Okay, what's that?
Well, if you think about it, in the modern world, guilt is almost entirely internalized. It is a feeling we carry around psychologically, like a heavy, invisible weight in our minds. But often, we have no clear, objective mechanism to permanently release it.
That is so true.
We might apologize to a friend. We might spend hours unpacking it in therapy, or we might try to quietly pay it back. But that lingering, nagging sense of, am I truly forgiven? Is the ledger actually clean? That often just remains.
We just carry it indefinitely. We hoard our guilt because there is no finish line.
Exactly. But Leviticus provided a deeply physical, tangible, and conclusive endpoint to guilt. You confessed out loud so the community heard it. You brought a physical object that cost you something, a ram, a bird, or even just a handful of dry flour.
Yeah.
You watched it be given over. And when the priest declared you forgiven, it was a finished, undeniable transaction. The ledger was balanced, materially and spiritually. It makes you wonder how much heavy emotional baggage we carry today simply because our society lacks a physical, universally accepted ritual for final forgiveness and starting fresh.
What an incredible perspective to end on. We began by looking at what seemed like a murky, bizarre list of ancient rules, and we uncovered a brilliantly clear path from sudden, hidden guilt to total, undeniable restoration.
It really is an amazing system.
The system provided an absolute physical answer to the universal human question of, am I okay? Thank you for diving deep with us today. I want to officially close our time together by declaring clearly and warmly that God blesses all of you listening right now. May you carry the peace of a truly balanced ledger into the rest of your week.